Welcome back. As you know, I've been playing through several of the bots on chess.com. I've also been playing against the computer on Lichess, and over there I just found Stockfish level 1, Stockfish level 2. Level 3 seemed to be the one that was closest to my level, especially when I started playing on the site back about a year ago. And I didn't do well at first, but I spread these games out over more time, so I think the improvement shows up. This is the actual symbol for Stockfish, by the way. I'm going to shrink that down. At least that's the symbol that I found on their website. And I'm going to put it right in there. As with the bots on chess.com, I let the computer choose which color I would play. And as you can see, we played some unusual openings. This was a year ago, before I had really decided which openings I was playing. And when I had the black pieces, I played c5 against e4, which was the Sicilian defense, and tried the Dutch defense versus d4 and the Nimzo-Indian. But we ended up with mostly Scandinavians against e4 when I had the black pieces, especially as I started getting better at that. And when I played the white pieces, I started with e4, and the computer played the Scandinavian against me. Maybe that's where I picked it up. We had the King's Pawn game, and then as I began playing d4, mostly London systems and the Indian defense. The moves numbers were all over the place. The column on the right is Stockfish 3, and all the others are the bots I've played on chess.com. As you can see, we had one game that went 140 moves. That's actually going to be one of the games I'll show you here in a minute, at least parts of it. The average moves were 57 moves per game, which was a little higher than the last few bots I've played on chess.com, but not entirely unusual. They're within my normal range. And we had a game as short as 22 moves. When the blunder chart is the one that's hardest, I guess, to compare with the others. For one thing, on chess.com, when I check what engine is looking at my moves and determining what's a mistake, what's a blunder, it was Stockfish 12, 12.1 or something like that. On Lichess, it's Stockfish 14. So it's a different engine, and I've noticed even if I import the same game that I played on chess.com and I import that game into Lichess, it's much harsher with its judgments of blunders. So that will account for at least some of the difference here. You can see the signpost, or whatever you want to call that shape there at the right. I averaged far more blunders per game, 4.9 against Stockfish. And Stockfish averaged far more blunders than the bots I've been playing on chess.com. But again, part of that, at least part of it, is due to the engine rating moves. There are moves that on chess.com the engine will rate as inaccurate or a mistake. Lichess will call it a blunder. In fact, several months ago I looked at several games on both sites and found that out. It definitely is a harsher engine. That doesn't excuse the fact that I did make a lot of mistakes. I will say that the average was brought up by a couple of games in which I missed the same tactic for about 6 moves in a row, and Stockfish counted that as a blunder every single time. And of course it did that for the engine that I was playing as well. So I'm going to close that out and open up the chessboard and see if I can get the engine pulled up over there. The first game I'm going to show you here is where the bot began to glitch. I suppose, similar to the bots on chess.com, the Lichess lower level bot will sometimes just not do something obvious. Here, I mean, it was a choice between the knight capturing or the pawn capturing, and it says that was a mistake, but that's not the real problem here. The problem was when I brought my bishop back to attack this knight, and the queen moved over there, perhaps pointing at this pawn, who knows. And when I took the knight, any human I've ever played, even really low-level humans, would just take this with the pawn. But Stockfish level 3 just didn't, which allows me to pull my bishop back, and I'm a piece ahead. Even if I end up giving up this pawn, it doesn't matter. I'm a piece ahead. And then a little bit later, I'm going to skip ahead to when we were in this position, I took back the rook, and obviously anybody you've ever played, unless they were in severe time trouble, would just take this knight here. But Stockfish just moved past it as if it couldn't see it. And so if you survive the opening without any serious blunders or mistakes, then the bot just begins missing obvious things. It doesn't blunder those in the same way that a human would. Also, I didn't realize till much later that you could play with an unlimited time control. So I was playing with time control. That was one thing that made this harder than the bots on chess.com, is that none of them have time controls. So here I always felt a little bit of pressure from the clock, especially because even these low-level bots won't take very much time. It's never going to run out of time. And I will. So I was careful to move more quickly. But the other game I wanted to show you, two things from this game. One is in this position, in which I have already blundered, and the computer is way ahead. It's up a full piece, and as you can see from the evaluation here, I'm way behind. Okay, but then I push the pawn to get the queen out. The queen doesn't go as far as it should. And here, I missed the obvious tactic of pushing this pawn, which threatens the bishop, but it gets out of the way of this bishop, which threatens the queen. So it basically guarantees that I win a piece. If I were to push this pawn, the queen should retreat somewhere, and then I will win the bishop for a pawn. But I missed it, as I said. I moved this bishop here, preparing to castle. So that was counted as a blunder. Then the computer, my opponent computer, didn't move the queen out of the way of this coming discovered attack. And it counted that as a blunder. Well, I'm seeing this, so I think I'm going to get out of that by castling. But again, this is the most important thing. So when I castle to get out of this pin, it's counted as a blunder because I didn't do this. Then the computer doesn't move the queen out of the way of that discovered attack. Well, I'm seeing this bishop here. I think if I put this pawn here and this pawn here, I can chase the bishop away. So I start working on that, but I miss this again. So that's another blunder. And that's what I was talking about, where in several of these games, we ended up with a lot of blunders because we kept missing the same tactic over and over. Now, I figured out later what this level of Stockfish does, Stockfish 3, is if you miss something that it thinks should be obvious, you definitely should do that. Sometimes it will blunder on its own just to see if you see that tactic on the next move. And that's what it was doing here. So I did the thing with the bishop. It actually didn't count that as a blunder. But then it did that. It just moved the bishop to a place where I can easily capture it with a pawn. But here, again, my best move was to push that pawn because the queen is still there. I didn't do it because I followed my plan and took the bishop. But it got counted as a blunder because I didn't do this very obvious move, or what it thinks should be obvious to me. It takes back instead of getting the queen out of the way. I still don't see that pawn push. So we're at, what, 6 times now I've missed this. So who knows why I did that? To protect this? I don't know. Finally, the queen moves out of the way. Anyway, that was one example of how we kept missing the same tactic over and over, and it counted as blunder after blunder after blunder. That's one thing that drove those averages up. The one other thing that I wanted to show you from this game before it gets too long, this is the really long game. I'm going to skip forward to, what move should I skip forward to? 70, yeah, you heard me right. 77, I want to say. Okay, so I'm lost here. As you can see from the evaluation number there, Stockfish has maiden 8. Well, it said 9 a second ago. It's just now found maiden 8. All I can do is basically say check, is what the engine is suggesting for me, and surprisingly, that's actually what I did. The king moves out of check. Still mate in 8. It needs to promote, right? It does. There's not much I can do. I can say check, which is actually what I do. Top engine move. Okay, but now, clearly, almost anybody I've ever played with both a rook and a queen on the board, compared to just a king and a knight, would immediately start going for mate. But the bot didn't. It goes for check. I take that last pawn. It takes the knight. Okay, so now, just the king on the board should be a really simple mate here. Even if you don't choose the best moves. Even if you just go for a ladder mate and try to walk the king across the side of the board. It should be mate in 2, according to the engine. But it goes there. Doesn't even put me in check. Doesn't set up a checkmate. Now we're back to mate in 4. So I'm just going to click through these moves to show you what the bot does. Again, doesn't put me in check. Now we're still at mate in 2. Mate in 3. I know I'm going to lose at any moment, so I'm just moving my king around, trying to stay as close to the center as possible. The bot just keeps not putting me in check, as if it doesn't know how, but it gives me a rook. So I take it. I'll take a free rook. But still, with a queen and a king, you should be able to checkmate me in a certain number of moves. 6, according to the engine at this point. Okay. I decide to come back to the center. And you can see the bot's just refusing to checkmate. So I'm going to start going faster, and just because the same thing is happening. We're at move 100 now. We weren't actually moving this fast during the game. I was just trying to stay as close to the center as I can. The king is in the way, so I can't get all the way back to the center. Still, mate in 6. Should be able to checkmate me at this point. We're not repeating moves because the queen keeps finding new squares to go to. And a new rank to go to, then it switches files. And at this point, I realize we're going to hit the 50 move rule. I've heard of this rule, but almost never come up against it. Okay, now it's finally got me back to the second rank. An obvious move, even for a beginner who doesn't know how to checkmate, should be thinking about pulling the queen to box me in even further. But the bot doesn't do it. Oh wait, there it did. So now I can't come up here, right? Obvious move there to keep me off of this, and I have to get to the back rank. But it just does that. So I stay on the second rank. And that's as far as it goes. And we end up, as I suspected, hitting the 50 move rule. Now it says it can't. The reason that was a blunder and the number went to zeros is because the counter knows that you're close to the 50 move rule, and it now can't checkmate me in the required number of moves, even if it was trying, which it's not. Except there I blundered, because now it can checkmate me in the required number of moves, but it didn't. So a couple more moves. That's move 140, and it's a draw. But anyway, that's I just wanted to show an example of how poorly the bot can glitch sometimes. I am going to try to move up to Stockfish 4 when I'm on Chess. I'm still playing the Venn bot on chess.com, and we'll see how that goes. Thanks for watching.